My husband mocks me for choosing to represent myself in court for our divorce hearing. He assumes it guarantees his victory. I never imagined that silence could be a weapon. When I discovered his hidden betrayals from secret affairs to financial manipulations, I realized the fight wasn't just for justice but for my own agency. Each calculated step I took, from quiet observation to methodical evidence gathering, became part of a plan he could never anticipate. By the time the courtroom revealed the full extent of his deception, he understood too late that the woman he underestimated had mastered patience, precision, and control. This is a story of betrayal turned into strategy, where quiet resolve becomes the most powerful form of revenge, and the ultimate victory is reclaiming one's life with dignity and unwavering calm. I remember the sound before anything else. Not the footsteps, not the turning of pages, not even the creaking of the two old wooden benches that lined the gallery. It was laughter. Low, careless, familiar laughter, the kind that once lived against my neck on quiet mornings. That's how the day began. With him laughing at me. Or more precisely, laughing at the idea of me walking into court alone, carrying nothing but a binder and a silence sharper than any attorney he could have hired. He didn't know the silence was intentional. He didn't know I had spent months learning how to wield it. The man who once called me his best decision glanced over his shoulder as his lawyer whispered confidently beside him. He didn't smile at me. He smirked that half-curled expression that meant he believed the universe itself supported him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Chicago winters train you for that. To hold your breath. To withstand the chill. To keep walking even when the wind feels personal. And that's exactly what he had become, a winter I'd learned to survive. The courtroom was warmer than expected, but somehow his presence shifted the air. It felt thick, oppressive, the way a room feels when someone has already claimed victory in their mind. I slid into my seat at the petitioner's table. Alone. And that was when the second wave of laughter rippled behind me, softer this time, unsure, as if others were trying to decode whether the mockery was socially acceptable. It didn't matter. Mockery was temporary. The truth was permanent. They didn't know yet that I had come prepared to burn the foundation of his lies, brick by brick, quietly. When the judge entered, the room snapped into posture. Everyone rose. Everyone fell silent. Everyone waited. Everyone except him. He leaned back. Relaxed. Confident. His attorney shuffled documents like a magician preparing a predictable trick. And he, the man I once trusted with my entire life, shot me a sideways whisper. Not words. Just a breath of amusement. Like he didn't believe I would survive what he had planned for me. The judge began reading the file. Her eyebrows furrowed at something, and I knew exactly what it was. My self-representation. Most people don't walk into a Chicago divorce court without a lawyer unless they've given up, or unless they're hiding something. I had given up on him, yes. But hiding? No. I was done hiding. That was his specialty, not mine. The judge glanced up. Mrs. Hale, you're representing yourself today? I nodded. My voice didn't shake when I answered. Yes, Your Honor. But inside, beneath the calm surface, a storm tightened its grip. To understand what led here to this courtroom, this cold air of superiority radiating off him, you have to understand the first crack. It wasn't the affair. Not the financial betrayal. Not the lies. It happened a year before that. In the kitchen. While he was buttering toast. He told me I wasn't ambitious enough. That my dreams were cute. That I shouldn't worry about money because he had it. He used to disguise insults as compliments. A tactic so subtle I questioned myself instead of him. That morning, something inside me folded. Something important, but I didn't speak. Silence was survival then. I didn't know it would become my weapon later. The judge continued, flipping through forms he assumed would be simple, straightforward. Income statements, property declarations, financial disclosures. His attorney had filed pages of confident claims, numbers inflated, assets minimized, narrative curated. And then there was my packet. Neat, unassuming, but weighted with something he hadn't anticipated. Truth. The moment the judge reached page 9 was the moment everything changed, though only I knew it then. He leaned forward, elbow on the table, watching the judge with smug expectation. His confidence was the kind that grows from never having been questioned. He knew he had the better attorney. He knew I had no representation. He believed the case would be over by lunch. After all, who walks away from a marriage and leaves the battlefield undefended? Who thinks they can challenge a man who spent years building financial walls she wasn't meant to climb? Only someone who had already climbed them in silence. His attorney began speaking long, performative arguments about my emotional volatility, my lack of financial contribution, my failure to understand marital responsibilities. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even look at them. Silence again, but this time, it wasn't survival. It was strategy. You would think betrayal hurts most when it's happening. It doesn't. It hurts when you realize how long it had been happening and how skilled the betrayer had become, and how foolish you were to love someone who sharpened his ego against your trust. But pain has an unexpected effect. When it cools, it becomes clarity. And clarity once you have it is unstoppable. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of his lawyer's theatrical monologue, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, do you have a response?" I stood. The courtroom shifted. People looked up from their phones. Even he stopped smirking, not because he feared me, but because he didn't want to miss the moment he believed would amuse him. I took a breath, slow, deliberate. "My response is in the documents I filed, Your Honor." I didn't motion toward them. I didn't explain. I simply waited. It was the waiting that unnerved him. He didn't know what I had done. He didn't know what I knew. And when the judge began reading the evidence I had quietly inserted, the evidence he thought didn't exist, the temperature of the room changed. It was raining that night. Chicago rain, unforgiving, cold, echoing against the windows like small confessions. He had fallen asleep on the couch, phone in hand. Unusual for him. He guarded that device like a second heartbeat. But that night, exhaustion betrayed him. When I picked it up, my hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't stutter. My breath didn't shorten. I think part of me already knew. The messages weren't romantic. They were worse. They were strategic. He wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was preparing to erase me financially. Joint assets moved. Accounts reclassified. Investments dissolved. Transfers authorized. All lines of communication between him and someone listed only as Advisor L. That letter. I didn't know it then, but it would become the detonator of everything that followed. I didn't confront him that night. Not because I was afraid, but because confrontation gives warning. Silence exposes. The judge paused as she reviewed the documents I had filed. Her eyes narrowed. Her mouth tightened. His attorney leaned closer to whisper something, but I saw at the first flicker of worry in his expression. You know when a predator smells smoke before seeing fire? That was him. A man sensing danger but unable to locate the source. I felt nothing. Not victory. Not satisfaction, just cold certainty. This was only the beginning. The judge slowly set the papers down. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice shifting, "we're going to need clarification on several discrepancies in your financial filings." His entire posture changed, the momentary collapse of a man who suddenly realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. He glanced at me. For the first time in months, he wasn't smirking. He was calculating. Trying to understand how I, the woman he dismissed as fragile, naive, and harmless, had managed to find the cracks in the fortress he built. And that was when he realized the one truth he had never considered. I was never as quiet as he believed. I was listening, learning, preparing. And page 9, the page the judge had paused on, was only the smallest piece of what I was about to reveal. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a courtroom when something unexpected is discovered. Not the silence of boredom. Not the silence of routine. But the silence of shift, the collective intake of breath when people realize the narrative is no longer headed where they assumed. That's the silence that settled around us now. The judge lifted her glasses slightly, scanning the documents once more. Tapping a single manicured finger against the margin of page 9, the page he had never imagined could betray him. I watched his throat tighten. A tiny movement, barely noticeable unless you knew him as intimately, as quietly, as I once did. I used to recognize that swallow as guilt in our marriage. Now it signaled fear. And fear was new for him. His attorney, the one he'd paid too much for and bragged about even more, leaned forward, trying to catch the judge's eye. "Your Honor, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding in my client's paperwork. Any discrepancies must be." She raised a hand. He stopped mid-breath. Judges don't like interruptions. Judges especially don't like being underestimated. "Mr. Hale," she said again, this time slower, "these filings show transfers made during litigation." "That's prohibited." The words echoed through the room. Transfers during litigation. Illegal. Punishable. Traceable. He turned toward me only for a moment as if hoping I would blink, flinch, hesitate. I didn't. If anything, my stillness gave him more to fear than my fury ever could. Because he didn't yet know that those transfers were only the beginning, not the climax. People think marriages crumble loudly. Dramatic arguments. Broken plates. Accusations hurled across rooms. Ours didn't. It dissolved quietly, like ice thinning across a lake. You don't notice it until you're already falling through. He used to be charming, the kind of charming that felt safe, harmless, almost warm. But charm ages like milk when its purpose is self-serving. Over time, the compliments faded. The conversations shortened. The affection became conditional, something I had to earn with silence and compliance. I wasn't a wife to him. I was a witness. A validator. A mirror meant to reflect only the angles he wanted the world to see. But even the best mirrors eventually crack. His attorney cleared his throat, adopting a tone meant to contain the situation. Your Honor, we'd prefer to address any misunderstandings in a private conference. No, she interrupted again. Misunderstandings do not require privacy. Only misconduct does. His attorney stiffened. He hadn't expected this judge. He'd expected someone more persuadable. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, binder closed. He looked at me again. I could almost hear the thought behind his eyes. What does she know? The answer? More than he ever intended. The night after discovering the messages on his phone, I sat awake at the dining table until dawn. I didn't cry. Tears felt too loud. Instead, I searched, quietly, efficiently, patiently. And that was when I found it, an email hidden inside a cloud backup he thought I didn't know existed. Subject line: reallocation plan confirmed. A spreadsheet attached. Numbers I didn't recognize. Accounts he never mentioned. Expenses that didn't belong to us. Transfers marked with a small annotation. Move before filing, J unaware. J. Me. The first time I saw it, I felt heat crawl up my spine. Not heartbreak. Not shock. Recognition. He had never intended fairness. He had never intended honesty. He had been preparing. Anticipating. My ignorance. But ignorance was his mistake, not mine. We will recess for 10 minutes, the judge announced. I need to review the petitioner's exhibits further. He froze. Recess wasn't good for him. Recess meant examination. Recess meant exposure. His attorney leaned in quickly, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. Why wasn't this in discovery? How did she get these? You said these accounts were closed. He shook his head. He didn't know what to say. He didn't have an explanation ready. And for a man who always had an explanation, that alone was a kind of downfall. I stood. My legs were calm. My heart steady. His eyes followed me as I walked toward the hallway, not with familiarity, not with affection, but with a dawning awareness that he no longer understood the person he once dismissed. Because he didn't realize the greatest threat to him wasn't what I filed. It was what I hadn't filed yet. I leaned against the wall outside the courtroom, letting the buzz of voices fade into a dull hum. People passed by. Lawyers with rolling briefcases. Nervous couples. A mother clutching documents to her chest as if they were life itself. Chicago courts have a particular smell: old paper, cold air from vents, faint disinfectant. But beneath that, something else. Fear. Regret. Stories unraveling. He approached eventually. Of course he did. His attorney tried to hold him back, but he shrugged him off and walked toward me. Not aggressively. Not angrily. Just unsettled. Jane, he said, voice low. I didn't answer. He didn't deserve that proximity yet. He stepped closer. Where did you get those documents? A simple question. One with 1,000 implications. I met his eyes. He wasn't used to my gaze anymore. I had spent so much of our marriage looking down, looking away, looking small. Not now. I found them, I said. I let the silence drip between us. Heavy. Sharp. His mouth parted as if to continue to plead, to lie. To manipulate, but the bailiff announced the judge's return. Our moment ended. But it wasn't the end. Far from it. When we re-entered the courtroom, the judge didn't waste time. Mr. Hale, she began, your explanation for these transfers? His attorney stood, but she lifted a hand. I asked Mr. Hale. His posture wavered. I'll need time to review those documents, he finally said. You submitted them, she reminded. Yes, but you swore under oath they were accurate. He swallowed. My silence wasn't passive anymore. It was pressure. And he could feel it. The judge hadn't even reached the second packet I filed. The one that would reveal not only financial betrayal, but emotional betrayal he never expected to see exposed. There's a universal truth about liars. They think lies create distance. But lies actually leave footprints. A week before he filed for divorce, he told me he was working late. He smelled like cologne when he came home. Not his. Someone else's. A floral note. Soft. Persistent. I didn't ask. He wanted me to ask so he could accuse me of being insecure. So I stayed silent. As always. As he preferred. But silence doesn't equal ignorance. Silence stores information. And the next morning, a receipt appeared in our joint account history. He must have forgotten to hide it. A dinner, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and a charge to a hotel. Room 417. Not business. Not late work. A pattern forming long before I discovered the messages or the financial secrets. He didn't fall out of love. He stepped out of it quietly, deliberately, one lie at a time. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, she said, addressing me now, your exhibits include detailed transaction logs, email correspondence, and account summaries. Did you prepare these yourself? I did. Her eyes studied me not with judgment, not with disbelief, with respect. Your documentation is unusually thorough for a self-represented litigant. I didn't respond verbally. I let the weight of her words fill the room. His attorney shifted uncomfortably. He knew what she meant. I wasn't just capable. I was dangerous. The judge set her pen down. Due to the gravity of these discrepancies, she said, this will no longer proceed as a simple divorce hearing. We are opening an investigation into potential financial misconduct. Gasps. Whispers. Tension crackling through the gallery. His jaw clenched. His attorney paled. And I remained perfectly still. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was simply revelation. Because the judge had only seen the surface. Page 9 was a spark. But pages 10 through 48. Those were the flames. Suspicion doesn't arrive fully formed. It doesn't knock on the door and introduce itself. It leaks. It drips. It settles into the fibers of your life like moisture under wallpaper. You don't see it until the surface starts to bubble. For me, suspicion began on an ordinary Tuesday. Not a dramatic night. Not a stormy evening. Just Tuesday. It's strange how some of the biggest fractures in your life begin on days that feel painfully normal. I remember standing by the kitchen counter in our condo overlooking Chicago's skyline, the same space we once painted together. The same view he once held me against while promising forever with a voice that felt warm. The coffee machine hissed quietly. The refrigerator hummed. And he came home an hour late. No text. No explanation. Just a faint smell on his collar. Not perfume this time. Not a woman's scent. Something colder. Distance. He walked past me with a casual, rehearsed smile, the kind a man uses when he believes he's still trusted. I had to stay back for paperwork, he said. A simple sentence. A forgettable sentence. But the way he said it, his eyes didn't linger the way they used to. His voice had a thinness to it, like he was afraid to speak too much. It didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a practice lie. Even worse. I stood there holding a mug I no longer wanted. Feeling reality shift by a degree you'd only notice if you were completely still. I didn't accuse him. I didn't ask questions. I simply watched. And that's what bothered him the most. Because a liar can handle accusations. They can't handle observation. I wish I could tell you I caught the first crack immediately. I didn't. Suspicion builds quietly. He began leaving his phone face down on tables instead of face up. He started subtly locking it each time he walked away, even if he was only going to another room. He defended his privacy more aggressively than his vows. But the moment that settled into my bones happened one night while we were watching TV. He got a notification, a message preview I wasn't supposed to see. Just a name. A name I didn't recognize. And a heart emoji. Not a big one. Not bold. Just a quiet, cowardly, gray heart. He turned the phone over so fast it made a faint thud against the coffee table. I didn't react. I simply filed the name away. Silently. Later that night he kissed my cheek goodnight. His lips felt like apology. Not affection. Back in the present, inside the courtroom, I saw it again, that flicker of fear behind his gaze. The same flicker I saw the night he realized I'd noticed the notification. People forget that memory is a kind of weapon. Silent, sharp, reliable. He looked at me like I'd become someone unfamiliar, but I wasn't new. He had simply never taken the time to really see me. Suspicion had changed me. Betrayal had sharpened me. And now, he was beginning to sense it. What he didn't know was that suspicion didn't just change me, it rewired me. Suspicion can sit quietly for only so long before it demands confirmation. One night, I decided to test the edges of truth. He told me again he'd be late, working on spreadsheets, he said, with a tone too smooth for honesty. But I noticed his tie was different that morning. He never changed ties midweek. Routine was his religion. Something was wrong. So I waited until he left. Then I changed quickly, put on a coat, grabbed my keys and followed him, not recklessly, not obsessively, just far enough to observe. Chicago traffic was thick that evening. The city lights blurred against my windshield. He drove into a part of the city we rarely visited together, a district full of boutique restaurants, cozy wine bars, and hotel lounges. Not spreadsheets. Not paperwork. I parked half a block behind him. I watched him step out of the car, adjust his jacket, check his phone, and walk toward a dimly lit restaurant with frosted windows. He wasn't meeting coworkers. He wasn't alone. He was early. Early for her. And I knew. But instead of storming in, I left. Because I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I was gathering information. I needed patterns, not moments. Patterns break people. Moments just anger them. And that night, I realized something far more dangerous than infidelity. Not only was he lying, he was planning. Suspicion is one thing. Proof, another. A week after following him, I noticed something odd in our shared account. A missing $600. Then a missing $1,200. Then a withdrawal labeled consultation fee. Consultation for what? And why did it sound expensive? I asked him casually about the missing funds during breakfast. He didn't blink. Oh, just investments, he said. A new opportunity. Nothing to worry about. But there was a problem. He forgot which lie he told last. 3 days earlier, he'd claimed he couldn't help pay for a minor home repair because money was tight this month. Tight. But not tight enough for investments. I didn't correct him. I simply noted the inconsistency. Silently, patiently. Suspicion was no longer an emotion. It was data. One night, he came home suddenly nervous. Pacing. Checking the windows. Rearranging objects that didn't need rearranging. He asked if I'd been on his computer. I hadn't. Not then. Anyway. I asked why. He said, just wondering. But his voice broke slightly. A crack. The same crack I saw in court when the judge questioned his documents. People think guilt screams. It doesn't. Guilt twitches. Guilt shifts weight from one leg to the other. Guilt avoids eye contact. Guilt acts busy. Guilt asks questions it already knows the answer to. And he was guilty. Not just of cheating. Not just of lying. Of something deeper. Something financial. Something strategic. Something he didn't want me to find. And that was the night I realized I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was fighting for my future. The confirmation came in the form of a bank notification. A message he didn't expect me to see. An alert he forgot was connected to my email as well. Unusual activity detected, transfer of $18,600 flagged. I stared at the screen for a long time. He had told me 2 days earlier he couldn't afford to fix the dishwasher. He had said we should tighten our spending. Yet here he was moving nearly $20,000. Suspicion finally stood up, fully formed, confident, aware. It wasn't just infidelity. It was preparation. But preparation for what? Divorce? Separation? A new life he'd built on lies? Or something worse, something involving assets he didn't want the court to see. He believed I'd remain the silent wife he'd shaped me into. He didn't realize silence can transform into something far sharper. After that notification, I sat at the dining table. The same table where he once laughed, once kissed my knuckles, once pretended to love me. I opened my laptop. And I searched. Every file. Every folder. Every backup. Every cloud login he overlooked. I traced transfers. I traced receipts. I traced communications. Suspicion had now become certainty. Because the lie he thought he hid the deepest was the one that led me straight to the evidence that would unravel him in front of the entire courtroom. Chicago has this way of telling you the truth before people do. The wind, especially sharp, honest, unforgiving. It was a late Thursday evening when I felt it. That quiet sting brushing against my face as I stepped out of the office, whispering something I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't know the word for it then. Now I do, confirmation. Michiel had been laughing more. Not with me, no, never with me. With someone else. Someone on the other end of a phone that screenlit his features in ways I hadn't seen in years. He'd tilt his head, smirk, and then when I walked in he'd snap the phone shut like his secrets were water and I was aflame. Suspicion is a quiet beast. It doesn't roar. It breathes. Slow. Subtle. Right beside you. I tried to ignore it at first. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself a woman working 70-hour weeks in a city fueled by ambition and caffeine had every right to be tired, insecure, stretched thin. But then came the inconsistency. The late meetings that didn't match his firm's calendar. The faint smell of perfume I didn't wear, floral, expensive, aspirational. The sudden gym memberships that somehow didn't make him sweat. And then something worse. The way he'd look at me with pity instead of love. That's what hurt. That night, he claimed he was working late with a partner on a real estate litigation draft. He said it with his usual nonchalance, leaning against the island counter, swirling whiskey in a glass like he was auditioning for a character he wasn't rich enough to be yet. But I saw it. The detail he didn't expect me to catch. He was wearing cologne he only used for social events. Not work. Never work. And he was freshly shaved. He only did that when he wanted to look good for someone. I didn't confront him. Not yet. When a woman knows, truly knows, that her world is being rearranged behind her back, she doesn't explode. She gathers, observes, she prepares. And that is what I did. It happened the next morning. A small miracle disguised as carelessness. He got a call while showering. His phone buzzed from the nightstand. The screen lit up. I shouldn't have looked. I know. But betrayal has a way of bending your moral compass until it points straight at the truth. Caller ID. M. Jim. Except he doesn't have a trainer whose name starts with M. And the phone number had a distinctly private feel to it, no contact photo, no details, just a clean, intentional alias. She wasn't Jim. She was the workout. I didn't answer. Didn't touch it. I just memorized the number. Because silence is the most powerful evidence collector. But fate wasn't done. 30 minutes later, after he left for work, his phone pinged again. This time? A text preview I wasn't meant to see. Last night was perfect. Same place next week? My hands turned to ice. My heart to steel. There it was. Not suspicion. Not insecurity. Not paranoia. Truth. Undeniable and deliberate. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Isn't that strange? You think you'd fall apart, shatter, crumble to dust. But instead I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out the tender parts of me and left only echoes. But hollowness is a dangerous thing. It makes room. For anger, for clarity, for strategy. And somewhere inside that emptiness, a voice, my own voice, whispered. Watch him. Don't confront him. Not yet. Silence is a courtroom, and I was building my case. Later that night, while he pretended to sleep beside me, his phone buzzed again. And this time, the preview showed something far worse than I had imagined. I've replayed that week in my mind so many times that the edges of each memory feel worn, like a photograph that's been handled too much. But there's one day, one moment that still slices sharply, untouched by time. The day everything I feared crossed the line into something undeniable. And like most betrayals, it didn't arrive with drama or noise. It arrived with silence. A silence so thick I nearly smothered in it. It started with a delay. Michael texted me at 4:37 p.m. Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. Short. No punctuation. Michael always used punctuation. Even in grocery lists. Something in me twisted, a tightness just beneath my ribs. But I pushed it down. Maybe traffic. Maybe a meeting ran long. Maybe I was imagining things again. But the next day, he was late again. And the next, 3 days. 3 identical texts. 3 identical tones. The pattern clicked in my chest like a lock turning. Thursday night. I walked past his office door at home, the one he always kept closed when he brought files back. But this time, it was cracked open. Just an inch. Just enough. Inside, the glow of his computer screen illuminated the room. And he wasn't in it. I should have walked away. I almost did. But my feet moved on their own. Guided by something colder than hope and hotter than dread. I didn't touch anything. I just leaned in, eyes scanning the screen. 2 emails sat open, one from a client, and one from her. A paralegal. New. Young. Pretty. I'd met her once. She smiled too long. The kind of smile that tested boundaries instead of respecting them. I told myself I was being paranoid. Until I clicked the top corner of the screen where the email thread preview sat, and saw the title. Tonight? My heartbeat stopped. Actually stopped. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. That one word tonight did all the damage. I closed the door quietly and went to bed without brushing my teeth. The next morning, Michael kissed my cheek before leaving for work. I didn't feel it. He said, "I'll be home early tonight. Want to do takeout?" I nodded. I didn't believe him. Because when a man lies about small things, he's practicing for bigger ones. Later that day, I called his office pretending to need him urgently. His assistant answered. "Oh, he left for the day," she said. "About an hour ago." It was only noon. Did he say where he was going? No, actually. He rushed out. There was a subtle tone in her voice, confusion. And confusion is the closest sibling to truth. I hung up, feeling the air leave my lungs like I'd been punched. This was no longer suspicion. This was confirmation. At 3:15 p.m., I parked across from the courthouse, facing the employees' lot. I wasn't proud of what I was doing. But heartbreak rarely asks permission before it turns you into something you don't recognize. Cars trickled out slowly, lawyers and clerks heading home. Then, 20 minutes later, Michael's silver sedan appeared. He wasn't alone. She was there, the paralegal stepping into the passenger seat like she'd been doing it for months. She laughed as she buckled in. He smiled at her like he used to smile at me. I didn't cry. Not one tear. Instead, my pulse went strangely calm. Like my mind had slipped into the eye of a storm. As they drove away, my hands shook, but not with sadness. With purpose. Because betrayal doesn't end you. It clarifies you. I followed them. Not closely. I knew better. Their destination? Not a restaurant. Not a conference. Not anywhere professional. A small condo building 20 minutes from downtown Chicago. She used a key. A key. And Michael followed behind her like a man who'd done this hundreds of times. That was the moment the world tilted. Not because he cheated. Not because he lied. But because he built a life with her, while unraveling mine. I didn't confront them. Not then. Not even a knock on the door. Instead, I drove home. Parked the car. Walked inside. And sat at the dining table in silence. My heart was in pieces, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. That was the night I looked into the mirror and realized something chilling. He thought I was weak. He thought I would break. He thought I would crumble quietly. He was wrong. Terribly wrong. Because the next morning, I discovered something far worse than an affair. Something that changed everything. Something that turned betrayal into ammunition. And I realized, he hadn't just cheated on me. He had underestimated me. I didn't go home right away. I didn't scream, or cry, or collapse to the floor the way some people imagine heartbreak looks. No, mine arrived quietly. Almost politely, like it wanted to knock first before shattering me. I drove the long way through Chicago's night down Lakeshore Drive, across the river bridges, past glass towers I'd once dreamed of working inside. Each one looked ghostly through my windshield, like the future I thought I had died inside them. I could still hear his voice. His laugh. That careless, amused shake of his head when I said I would represent myself. It echoed louder than the betrayal. Because the infidelity, the hidden attempt to take everything, the legal ambush, all of that hurt. But his laughter? His disbelief that I had any power? That was the wound that split me in half. Walking inside felt wrong. Like I had trespassed into someone's life rather than returned to my own. The silence was dense. The kind that sits on your chest and waits. His jacket still hung on the hook. His shoes pointed neatly toward the door. His cologne floated faintly in the hallway. And the bed. I couldn't even look at the bed. So I sat on the floor in the living room, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the wall like it might offer answers. It didn't. It only held the shadows of a life I no longer recognized. It started as a tremor, just a tiny shake in my breath. Then my lungs locked. My stomach twisted. My hands curled like they were trying to hold something that wasn't there anymore. And suddenly, the tears came so fast they felt violent. Not sobs. Not screams. Just this pure, broken pouring out of everything I'd been holding together since the courthouse. It felt like drowning in a room full of air. Every moment of our marriage flashed like film frames. Holidays. Birthdays. Inside jokes. Late-night conversations about our future. All of it, but now it looked like a lie. A performance I had never auditioned for. And the worst part? I still loved him. That was the knife. I wiped my face. Stood up. Looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My eyes were red. My expression, empty. My voice, when I finally spoke aloud, sounded like it belonged to someone older, someone who had seen too much. Why wasn't I enough? A simple question. But the silence that followed. It was too sharp, too honest. And then, something inside me shifted. Not healed. Not strengthened. Not yet. Just shifted. Like the floor under my grief began tilting towards something colder. Sharper. More awake. I realized something. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about survival. And survival has a way of burning the unnecessary parts of you away. They kept coming. Little scenes in my memory. The nights he came home late from work. The secretive texts. The sudden defensiveness. The missing money. The way he always pushed me to stop helping in his business. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was strategic. From his side. I felt sick. But beneath the sickness was something else. Recognition. I wasn't just hurt. I was being played. Hours passed. At some point, the tears dried out of exhaustion rather than closure. I walked to our bedroom, pulled a blanket off the bed without even glancing at the pillows, and made a small sleeping space on the couch. Before lying down, I whispered to no one, "I won't let you destroy me." And for the first time that day, I believed myself, because what neither of us knew then, not me, not him, was that the real destruction had already begun. And I wasn't the one standing in its path. I remember the moment the rage inside me shifted into something colder, something quieter. It was the evening after court, after Michael's smirk, after his attorney's barbed comments, after the judge's dismissive glance that cut deeper than any verdict. The anger finally stopped burning hot, and began to crystallize. You see, heartbreak screams. But revenge, real revenge, whispers. And that night, Chicago felt frozen in place. The wind scraped at the windows like it wanted inside, and the lights of the city flickered under a fog thick enough to swallow anyone who wasn't paying attention. I paid attention. Something in me clicked. A switch. A pivot. A realization. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to match Michael's cruelty or his attorney's arrogance. I needed to be smarter, quieter, unpredictable. The kind of quiet that unnerves people because it feels like the calm before a devastating winter storm. And I knew I was capable of that kind of quiet. I started with the one thing he underestimated the most. My memory. Michael always thought I was forgetful, too emotional to track details, too distracted by life's chaos to notice the subtle inconsistencies in his stories. He was wrong. I remembered everything. Every date. Every slip. Every unexplained late night, work emergency. I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder I had never planned to use. A folder I created months before the separation, when my intuition whispered warnings I didn't want to listen to. The folder was labeled with one harmless word: garden. Inside it, screenshots, receipts, backups, location data, little breadcrumbs he never knew he dropped. He once laughed at me for using cloud storage. That laugh came back to haunt him. I wasn't looking for it. Not intentionally. Not at first. I was scanning through old bank statements, highlighting transactions that didn't match the life Michael claimed he was living. But halfway through, something strange caught my eye, an account number I didn't recognize. And attached to it, a deposit. A large one. Not from his job. Not from any source I knew. Then another. And another. The amounts increased in a pattern, small at first, then significant enough to raise suspicion even for someone who never touched finances before the divorce. These weren't payments. They were transfers. Not to him. From him. To someone else. Someone he'd been quietly supporting. Financially. Consistently. And the last deposit? 2 weeks before he filed for divorce. Labeled with a code I instantly recognized, the same reference number from the email I found the night everything fell apart. She wasn't just a secret. She was an investment. That realization hit like a knife gliding through silk, silent, clean, irreversible. It was her name on the beneficiary document. Not mine. Not ours. Hers. Michael had been funneling money into an account she controlled. But the real shock wasn't the money. It was the title on the paperwork: contingent ownership in case of marriage or long-term cohabitation. He wasn't just betraying me. He was building a future without me. While still married to me. While lying under oath. While parading around court with fabricated pity. That night, something inside me died. But something else woke up. I didn't storm into his apartment. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I simply organized everything. Digitized every document. Backed up every file in 3 hidden places. Printed the most damaging pieces and sealed them inside a black envelope. And then, I listed everything I could use. Not to hurt him emotionally. No. That would be too small. I wanted to dismantle him. Strategically. Legally. Silently. Beautifully. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Because as I sorted through his digital life, I stumbled on something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that didn't just shift the direction of my revenge, it transformed it entirely. A second folder. One he never intended anyone to find. Hidden behind 2 layers of encryption he thought I'd never crack. Inside it. A document linking him to something far bigger, far darker, and far more dangerous than infidelity. A document that made my eyes sting. My pulse stop. My hands go cold. Because it wasn't just betrayal. It was a crime. One he had committed. One he had pinned on someone else. One that if exposed would not only strip him of everything, it could destroy his entire career. And I had just become the only person who knew it existed. I didn't sleep that night. Because in my hands, I now held the kind of secret people would kill to keep buried. And the man who laughed at me in court? He had no idea that the quiet woman he mocked had just found the weapon that could end him. And this was only the beginning. I've learned that revenge doesn't begin with a loud declaration. It begins with an unobservable shift, the kind that unfolds in silence, beneath ordinary routine, unnoticed by the one who deserves what's coming. And that morning, as Chicago stirred awake under its November gloom, I made my first move. A small move. A quiet one. But it was enough to tilt the ground beneath Michael's feet. I didn't act out of impulse. I didn't scream, didn't throw accusations across the kitchen, didn't demand answers he was never going to give honestly. No, I did what people like him never expect. I went still, focused, strategic, and stillness terrifies a guilty man more than any outburst ever could. I spent the morning combing through our shared accounts, scanning old tax returns, tracing patterns in spending I used to ignore. Everything I once chalked up to carelessness suddenly had meaning. And then, I found the account. Hidden under a business DBA I never knew he registered. Small deposits every few months. A balance that didn't match his salary. My fingers hovered over the screen. There it was. The first undeniable breadcrumb leading to the financial infidelity that ran parallel to the emotional one. I screenshotted everything. Printed what mattered. Stored copies in 3 different encrypted drives. A tiny move. But it was my seed. The one that would grow into the vine that eventually strangled the truth out of him. I wasn't angry while I worked. Just methodical. Later that afternoon, fate handed me a gift. Michael came home earlier than usual. Not because he wanted to spend time with me, no. He walked in with the kind of nervous energy that only guilty men carry. A jitter beneath the surface, a stiffness around the shoulders. He asked casually, too casually, if I needed anything from his office drawers. I said no. But that slip, that unnecessary question, it confirmed he was hiding something physical. People who panic reveal where the treasure is buried before you even start digging. He didn't know I had already copied everything from his laptop the night before while he slept with the gentleness of someone who believes he's untouchable. That night, I waited until he fell asleep again. Then I went to the living room and dialed the number he never thought I would notice. A number listed on bank statements as a consultation contact. It wasn't a woman who answered. It wasn't a business partner either. It was the law firm providing early advice about how to protect his assets from me. He wasn't just betraying me. He was preparing to discard me. Quietly, efficiently, legally. For a moment, just a moment, my vision blurred. Not from sadness, but from the cold clarity that comes when deceit becomes undeniable. "I see," I whispered into the phone. I thanked them for answering, then hung up. And that was when the turning point began. I returned to our bedroom, stood beside him, watched the rise and fall of his chest under the blanket. He slept as though nothing in the world was shifting beneath him. But something had. I had shifted. Instead of confronting him, I made a different call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. I called someone with far more precision, far more patience, far more familiarity with the shadows people like Michael think they own. My Aunt Clara, retired paralegal, expert in paperwork, loopholes, and the art of unearthing skeletons without making a sound. She picked up on the second ring. "Jane," she whispered, as though she already knew. "What did he do?" I told her everything. Not with tears. Not with rage. But with the steady clinical tone of a woman assembling her armor plate by plate. She breathed out slowly. "All right," she said. "Then we start tonight." That line, spoken in the shadows of my quiet living room, became the moment my story shifted from victimhood to precision. By morning, the first phase of my plan was complete. All financial accounts duplicated. Hidden business identity documented. Consultation call logged. Timeline drafted. Initial asset tracking launched. Backup witness established. Aunt Clara. Michael still believed he was 10 steps ahead. That I was oblivious, distracted, predictable. He didn't notice that my silence had changed color. Not soft, not wounded, but sharpened. He kissed my cheek on his way out the door, habit, not affection, and I let him believe everything was normal. Then, the moment he turned the corner, I mailed a packet to myself. A legally time-stamped, sealed envelope containing the first collection of evidence. My safety net. My opening move. My insurance policy. The beginning of his unraveling. But the twist wasn't that I found his hidden accounts, or that he was preparing to divorce me silently. The twist was something else. Something I discovered by accident the next morning, tucked inside a folder he thought he deleted. Something that would change the entire trajectory of my plan. I used to think revenge was a single moment, a strike, a blow, a revelation. I was wrong. It's a series of quiet tests. Small, almost imperceptible moves that feel like nothing to the outside world, yet shift the ground beneath your opponent until they don't realize they're already sinking. And that's exactly what I needed to see now. How Michael behaved when the ground beneath him shifted. I started with something simple. Something that didn't look like revenge at all. I stopped asking questions. Not about his schedule. Not about the case. Not about finances, friends, habits, reactions. Nothing. Silence, when used correctly, is a weapon. And Michael? He was addicted to being observed, listened to, validated. When I pulled my attention away, he twitched. Every single time. The man who once bragged about being unshakable couldn't stand the quiet. And that told me more than any confession ever could. The next test was bolder. I spent the afternoon in the home office, his sanctuary, sorting old files, sharpening pencils for no reason, occasionally letting out thoughtful hums as if I'd found something unusual. I didn't actually touch anything important, but I made sure it looked like I had. Around sunset, he walked in. His body froze. His eyes locked on the partially open drawers. His throat tightened. He didn't ask if I needed help. He didn't ask what I was doing. He lunged for the drawer like a man trying to hide his diary before someone saw the pages. That was his first mistake. If you're innocent, you don't panic when someone touches a drawer. He tried to casually rearrange a stack of envelopes too quickly. A normal person would have moved slow, maybe annoyed, maybe confused. Michael moved like the envelopes carried secrets written in blood. Good. He didn't know it yet, but the test had already been graded. Over the next few days, I tried more small, psychological pushes. A misplaced look. A long, thoughtful pause. A quiet hum while staring at my phone. He'd flinch, glance over his shoulder, check his email more often, lock his phone twice as fast. He had something to lose. And he believed accurately that I'd figured out more than I let on. I wanted to see how far I could push before he cracked. But the real test came next. Chicago winters have a way of sharpening the mind. Cold air, harsh wind, a kind of silence that cuts. It was the perfect setting to escalate. I placed a sealed blank envelope on his desk. No name. No label. Just paper, slightly thickened with nothing inside. Then I left the house. Half an hour later, my phone blew up with 3 calls from him, then 4, then 5. I didn't answer. By the time I got home, he was pacing. His first words weren't "Why is this here?" or "Is this yours?" or "What's inside?" No. They were, "Where did you get this?" Interesting choice. I tilted my head, pretending not to understand. He waited for a real answer but didn't want to give me a clue about what he thought the envelope contained. He was scared of revealing his own guilt. I watched him try to act casual. He failed. He sat down. He tapped the sealed flap with one finger. He stared at the envelope like it might detonate. Then he locked it in the same drawer he thought I hadn't noticed before. I nearly smiled. One blank envelope told me everything. He had secrets buried in paperwork. Dangerous ones. The next escalation was social. For 2 weeks straight, we had conversations that felt like chess. I spoke less. He spoke too much. He'd over-explain the smallest details, rushing to cover holes no one had pointed out. He tried to reassert control. Asked about my schedule, my plans, my activities. I answered in ways that were technically true, but only shown in shadows. I let him believe I was drifting away emotionally. He mistook that for vulnerability. He didn't realize I was drifting above him, not away. The less I said, the more he speculated. The more he speculated, the more paranoid he became. The more paranoid he became, the more mistakes he made. This wasn't revenge yet. This was data collection. Then came the discovery I didn't anticipate. One night, I returned home earlier than usual. He was in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice lowered, strained, frantic. He didn't hear me at first. "She knows. I swear she knows. I don't know how much yet. No, I didn't tell her anything. I'm not stupid. Listen, if this gets out." He turned. His entire face drained. He didn't even hit end call. The person on the other end hung up first. That was the second major crack. Who was he talking to? What did they fear I might reveal? And what, exactly, did he think I knew? He tried to laugh it off. A terrible, brittle sound. "Oh hey Jane. Just work stuff. Stress. You know how it is." I nodded. Quiet. Understanding. Observing. Inside, every piece of the puzzle illuminated at once. There was someone else involved. Someone he trusted enough to panic to. Someone equally terrified. And Michael, the man who once mocked me for studying psychology, had just exposed his own fracture point. The next morning, I didn't confront him. I didn't mention the call. I didn't speak of the envelope. I didn't utter a single accusing word. I just asked one simple question. How was work? A normal man gives a normal answer. Michael? His voice trembled. He rambled. He lied. He contradicted himself. The question wasn't the test. His reaction was. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity, or ego, or arrogance. There was something deeper, something institutional, something connected to the courthouse. And he thought I'd uncovered it. He was right. The night before everything changed, Michael did something unexpected. He went into the office after midnight. Not the home office. His courthouse office. And he didn't know I was following him. I didn't expect the night to turn into a battlefield made of whispers. But it did. And it started with a message I wasn't supposed to see. Before I tell you what I uncovered, let me take you back to the moment right before everything tilted. I had been tightening the net around Michael for weeks quietly, methodically. I watched how he flinched whenever I appeared unexpectedly. How he angled his phone away, the screen brightness always dimmed too low. How the warmth in his eyes evaporated whenever he thought I wasn't paying attention. But even with all that, nothing prepared me for the truth that waited around the corner. One moment, I was testing small boundaries, switching routines, showing up early, asking subtle questions. The next, I found myself staring at something sharp enough to carve new lines in my soul. It was a Thursday evening in Chicago, the kind where the wind doesn't cut you, it interrogates you. I came home earlier than usual, carrying takeout to avoid conversation, and found Michael asleep on the couch. Or so I thought. His breathing was too controlled, his posture too stiff, his phone too conveniently unlocked beside him. For a second, I stood there, frozen in place. My fingers curled slowly, then released. I wasn't planning to touch it. I swear I wasn't. But fate sometimes pushes your hand when you're too tired to resist. And as soon as my thumb brushed the screen just a light, accidental graze, the messages opened. That's when the world cracked. It wasn't a one-on-one text. Not even a private thread. No, it was worse. A newly made group chat titled, The Trial Training Wheels. Members, Michael, his friend Mark, his co-worker Alicia, and a name I didn't recognize, K.S. Their messages scrolled like tiny blades. You think she'll actually try to represent herself? Let her. Judges love clueless wives. Jane versus Michael. I bet she folds. Bro, she's too calm. You sure she's not hiding something? Relax. She's smart but soft, no spine. Soft. No spine. Clueless wife. My vision didn't blur, it sharpened. Every word etched itself into place like a new law of nature. But the real twist, the one that tore through the last thread holding my faith in him, came from Michael himself. He wrote, "She's predictable. I know how she thinks. She'll panic like always. We just need to pressure her before court." And then, the message that changed everything. "And if she figures out anything, we'll just say she's unstable. She hates confrontation. Easy win." He didn't just plan to win. He planned to destroy me. Emotionally, legally, publicly, not because he needed to, but because he assumed he could. Before I put the phone down, one last notification appeared from K.S. Don't forget the file. Make sure she never sees it. A file, the kind that requires secrecy, the kind they were desperate to hide from me, the kind that instantly rewired every suspicion into a flashing blueprint. I took the phone, screenshotted everything, emailed myself copies, and placed it back beside him. Untouched. Undisturbed. Exactly where it had been. Michael still pretended to sleep. I let him, because right then, I realized I wasn't looking at a conflicted husband. I was looking at a man preparing for war. And he didn't know I had just opened the first weapon. The next revelation came less than an hour later, completely unplanned. I stepped outside for air, letting the harsh Chicago wind sting my cheeks back to clarity. And that's when my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called down from her porch. She hesitated, eyes cautious, scanning me the way people do when they're debating whether to speak or stay silent. "Jane, honey," she murmured. "You know Michael's been meeting someone in the alley behind the courthouse, right? Someone. Not a client. Not a coworker. Someone." I didn't react. I couldn't. Not yet. But inside, the puzzle shifted again, lines connecting where they hadn't before. The secret file. The hidden meetings. The new phone behavior. The group chat mocking me. The plan to attack my credibility. It was all part of something larger. Something I hadn't fully grasped yet. Because as Mrs. Henderson stepped closer, she whispered a detail so specific my pulse stuttered. The woman he meets, she carries documents. Not handbags. Documents. Not affection. Not flirting. Not romance. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. This was betrayal of the law. Back inside, Michael still lay motionless on the couch. And for the first time since the marriage began, I looked at him without pain, only precision. I realized something eerie. He was no longer the storm I feared. He was a predictable pattern. A pattern I finally understood. That night, I didn't cry. Didn't break anything. Didn't confront him. I simply planned. Planned in the shadows. Planned in silence. Planned with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. Because now, I knew. The man laughing at the idea of me standing alone in court had no idea he had just handed me the very evidence I needed to dismantle him. Piece by piece. Lie by lie. Motion by motion. And the best part? He still believed I was predictable. That would be his downfall. He thought he understood my fear. He had no idea he'd just awakened my strategy. And he'd soon learn. A quiet woman isn't a harmless woman. She's simply unannounced. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Not because of fear, but because everything was finally aligning. For weeks, I had been building my strategy like a puzzle, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately, always one silent move ahead of Michael. By the time sunrise brushed across Chicago, the city looked almost complicit in what I was about to do. Cold, sharp, unforgiving, perfect. Because I wasn't walking into that courtroom as the naive wife he thought he could break. I was walking in as the woman who had spent months preparing the one thing he never expected. A plan with no emotion, only precision. I arrived early. Not to prepare, no, that part was done. I came early to watch. Michael always showed his true face when he didn't know I was looking. I sat in the hallway, pretending to review documents I had already memorized. Then he appeared, tailored suit, fake confidence, eyes scanning for threats he never imagined would come from me. He laughed with his attorney. The same laugh he used when he mocked me for representing myself. The same laugh that once made me shrink. But I didn't shrink this time. I watched. There's a strange calm that comes when you've already accepted what you're willing to lose. I had reached that point weeks ago. Right before we entered the courtroom, his attorney approached me. She leaned in, soft voice, patronizing tone, a cocktail of arrogance and misplaced confidence. "Jane. Sweetie, you really should have let a professional help you." I didn't look at her. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe any deeper. I just said, "I did." She blinked. Confused. Michael snorted. "You can't afford one," he said, loud enough for the hallway to hear. And that was the moment I knew I owned the day. Because the truth, the one he hadn't discovered yet, was that I didn't hire a lawyer. I hired expert witnesses, certified analysts, and forensic specialists. People who didn't represent me, but whose evidence would. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My heartbeat didn't change, not even a fraction. By the time we sat, Michael already looked irritated. He hated unpredictability. He hated silence. He hated that I wasn't breaking. His attorney opened with her usual theatrics, painting him as the reasonable husband, the financially supportive partner, the victim of my emotional instability. I didn't interrupt, didn't object, didn't move. Because sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is let your enemy talk uninterrupted. They eventually overplay their hand. And she did. Over and over. The judge gestured to me. I stood. Slowly. Controlled. Every movement intentional. "Your Honor, I would like to submit new evidence." Michael's head snapped toward me like he'd been slapped. His attorney smirked. "Objection, surprise evidence." The judge cut her off. "It's allowed if relevant." It was more than relevant. It was a fuse. I placed a single folder on the table. Thin, understated, harmless looking. But inside it was the first step of the execution. Financial discrepancies. Unauthorized transfers. Receipts. A timeline only someone who studied him would know to build. His face went pale. His attorney skimmed the papers, her lips tightening, her posture straightening as she realized she wasn't holding homemade wife research. She was holding professionally gathered, cross-verified data. The kind that holds up in federal court. This was always step one. "Your Honor," I continued, "I'd like to call my first witness." Michael's jaw dropped. His attorney turned to him with an expression I had waited months to see. "You didn't tell me about this." A forensic accountant entered. Professional. Neutral. Deadly. They answered every question with calm clarity, detailing inconsistencies in Michael's financial disclosures. Money never lies. It only hides until someone disciplined enough digs it up. By the time the accountant finished, Michael looked physically shaky. But that wasn't the turning point. Not yet. No, that moment was still coming. The room felt frozen when the judge nodded for me to proceed. I spoke quietly. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my second witness." Michael's attorney didn't bother objecting this time. She knew better. The door opened. And his coworker, the one who had unknowingly been copied on several emails he thought he deleted, stepped inside. Her expression said everything. She wasn't there out of kindness. She was there because the subpoena left her no choice. She testified to conversations. Patterns, access logs, inconsistencies in his claims. Each sentence chipped another piece off the facade he'd built. By the time she finished, Michael had stopped pretending to be composed. He was sweating. Jaw tight. Eyes dull with panic. That's when I realized something. He wasn't afraid of losing the case. He was afraid of losing control. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to respond?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, a silent plea. "Don't make this worse." But he couldn't help himself. He stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. And he broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just broke. He muttered something about me being manipulative, calculating, impossible to predict. He meant it as an insult. But to me, it was confirmation. I hadn't just regained power. I had redirected the entire narrative. What the judge said next sealed everything. Mr. Carter. It appears your wife is far more prepared than you are. A quiet gasp broke across the courtroom. Michael sat down. Slowly. Defeated. And I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I didn't gloat. I simply breathed. The turning point wasn't that I won emotion. Or that I proved him wrong. The turning point was that he finally understood. I wasn't the one on trial. He was. But of course, he wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. Not Michael. What he did next changed everything. The courtroom doors closed behind us like the lid of a coffin. Not mine. His. I could feel it, the weight of every choice, every secret, every lie collapsing on him like Chicago winter snow piling against an unlocked door. The judge's decision hadn't been final. Not yet. But the repercussions were immediate. The financial investigation triggered audits. The banks froze accounts. Every hidden transaction, every concealed asset now faced scrutiny. And he was standing in the eye of it all. I remember watching him slump in his chair, shoulders sagging for the first time I had ever seen. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defiant. He was startled. Startled because the careful life he had constructed, brick by brick, facade by facade, was not just cracking, it was crumbling. The first call came from his attorney. We need to speak, the lawyer stammered. His usually commanding voice shrank to a whisper. A man who had always held control suddenly had no leverage, no answers, no defenses. It was delicious in a quiet, calculating way. Not triumphant. Not gloating. Just precise. Within hours, news began to circulate. Not the kind that makes headlines, but whispers between the right people, his colleagues, the banks, our neighbors. Information leaks are dangerous in a world where appearances matter more than truth. He had thought secrecy was protection. He had assumed his betrayal would remain hidden. He had underestimated one quiet, observant woman. Every transfer flagged. Every account traced. Every lie documented. And every single person he thought would shield him now saw the cracks. I had waited. Months. Weeks. Days. All orchestrated in silence. The first whispers began after I had left subtle evidence trails in his attorney's briefings. Deposits and withdrawals documented, subtly copied, double-checked, small errors left intentionally like breadcrumbs. I knew the domino effect would require patience. Patience and precision. And patience had never failed me. By mid-afternoon, his professional world was unraveling. Calls from auditors. Questions from colleagues. Legal threats piling higher than he had ever imagined. And all of it traced back to me. I did not smile. I did not taunt. I simply observed. The power of observation is underestimated in a world built on assumptions. People believe they control the narrative, until the narrative bends against them. He was learning this the hard way. Because while he panicked externally, I was about to reveal a truth he had thought was buried forever. People closest to him started to hesitate. Small cracks of doubt appeared in their support. Friends who once nodded blindly now asked questions. Partners who had once laughed with him now avoided his calls. He tried to spin it. He tried to explain. He tried to buy loyalty. None of it worked. I had prepared for this. Every domino I pushed had a counterdome ready. Every ally he assumed safe had already been informed of the truth. And the truth is a weapon far sharper than any lawyer's words. But the real shock had not yet hit. Because one final domino remained, the one that would hit him personally. It wasn't enough to dismantle his finances. It wasn't enough to expose him professionally. No, the consequences had to resonate personally. His pride. His ego. His perception of control. I knew that shattering his reputation wasn't enough unless he also felt the sting of personal betrayal. I let the small seeds I planted, emails, documents, recordings, slowly reach the hands of those he trusted. Colleagues. Friends. Even family. All of them began to question him. All of them began to doubt. And he knew I was behind it. He knew it because the pattern was too precise, too quiet, too perfect to be coincidence. He found me at the courthouse exit later that evening. Not with rage, not with charm. With desperation. "Jane. What have you done?" he asked. His voice was low, trembling. The man who once mocked me now looked small, diminished. I looked him in the eye. "Nothing you haven't already set in motion," I said. And that's when I realized, The dominoes I had pushed were no longer under my control. They were moving on their own. And every one of them hit with precision. Because while he scrambled to stop the chain reaction, the dominoes had already begun toppling into places he would never recover from. I walked away that evening without another word. I didn't need to. The city lights reflected in the puddles from a late autumn drizzle. Chicago had that gray, haunting beauty that mirrors consequences. It was the perfect backdrop for a man finally meeting the results of his own choices. And I realized the beauty of consequence. It is impartial. It is inevitable. And it is cold. Returning to our apartment, the silence hit me differently. I had always associated silence with suppression. Now it was a weapon. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. Every look, every movement, every half-smile from him was now measured. He calculated. He feared. He understood, finally, the power of a woman who had mastered patience and observation. I had dismantled his world without shouting, without confrontation, without a single dramatic gesture. I had turned his arrogance against him. Consequences are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, cumulative, invisible until the final piece drops. And the final piece? It always hits hardest when the perpetrator has convinced themselves of invincibility. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply allowed justice calculated, inevitable, precise to unfold. The law. The truth. My patience. Those were the tools I wielded. And now, he was learning what it feels like to be dismantled by the very silence he had once mocked. Asterisk. He thought exposure would be limited. He thought he had time. He thought he controlled the story. But the falling had already reached the last row. And the fall was coming faster than he could stop. Asterisk. He never saw me coming. Not in the literal sense, he had always underestimated the quiet ones. But this time, it wasn't just underestimation. It was arrogance. I found him in his office late that evening, the same office where he once celebrated promotions, deals, and victories with a smug certainty I had always despised. The air was thick with tension. It smelled faintly of leather and desperation. He looked up when I entered, eyebrows lifting in polite surprise. The kind of surprise that says, "I didn't think you had it in you." And that, exactly, was the truth. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I stood in the center of the room, binder in hand, like an arsenal disguised as paperwork. I let him fidget first. His hands moved nervously over his desk, shuffling papers he now knew would betray him. And I let silence do the work. He swallowed, tried to regain composure. "Jane, what is this?" he asked, voice tight, brittle. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the binder. Slowly, deliberately, and laid out the evidence of months of deceit, hidden transfers, and manipulation. Everything he thought invisible was suddenly in plain sight. He leaned back in his chair, realizing he could no longer dominate the narrative. I had dismantled his control without a word until this moment. And now, the full weight of his miscalculations pressed down on him. Where did you get all this?" he stammered. I met his eyes coldly. "Where you left it for me to find," I said. "No mercy. No flourish. Just truth." He blinked rapidly, as if my words alone could undo the patterns of betrayal he had meticulously built. Because the realization was dawning. I had prepared for every contingency. He had prepared for none. I spoke slowly, deliberately, recounting the chronology of his deception. The transfers he thought I wouldn't notice. The secret communications he believed I'd never trace. The subtle lies he used to justify emotional detachment and manipulation. With each revelation, his composure faltered. I watched his hands tremble slightly over the desk. I watched his jaw tighten until it turned white. This was not theatrics. It was dismantling someone he once thought untouchable. I closed the binder, placed it on the desk, and leaned slightly forward. "You don't get to mock me in court. You don't get to laugh when I enter alone. You don't get to assume silence means weakness." His face paled. He didn't respond. I continued. "You built a fortress of lies around yourself. You thought it protected you from exposure. It didn't. And it won't protect you from the consequences of your choices." And in that moment, I realized the most effective weapon isn't anger or violence. It's the quiet certainty of inevitability. Because he finally understood that everything he had done would lead here, and nothing he could say would reverse it. The first verbal crack came unexpectedly. I didn't mean for." He stopped, choked on the words he didn't know how to finish. I didn't mean for any of it to. I held up a finger. Stop. Just stop. I don't want excuses. I want truth. And you've already told enough by what you didn't say. His shoulders sagged. The confident man who once mocked me now trembled under exposure. Every false justification evaporated in the weight of undeniable evidence. I stepped closer. Not threateningly. Not with rage. With the quiet inevitability of a storm he never saw coming. We didn't need words for the next 10 minutes. He sat frozen, eyes darting to every document, every line of proof. He wanted to speak. He wanted to manipulate. But the truth was already overwhelming. The silence was heavier than any confrontation could have been. He had built his life on the assumption that people would fear his voice. But now, silence was his punishment. Because the final piece, the secret he thought I could never discover, was still in my pocket, waiting for the precise moment to be revealed. I opened a second folder. The one containing the messages he believed I would never find. The email threads, receipts, and the final, damning document. The blueprint of his betrayal. He leaned forward, reaching instinctively to snatch it. But I held it firmly. This is what you hid from me. Not just the money. Not just the lies. But the plan. Your plan for everything without me. Against me. I spread the documents across the desk. His face drained of color. I could see the realization hitting him in slow, brutal increments. And in that moment, the man who once laughed at my self-representation in court understood. I was never powerless. I had always been waiting. And now, every piece of his deception lay bare. I stepped back, letting the weight of exposure sink in. You wanted to believe you were untouchable, I said. You thought I would never see the patterns, never follow the threads. Never understand the plan. He opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came. Not because he lacked words, but because he finally realized how completely he had miscalculated me. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He was no longer the orchestrator. He was the exposed. And I, finally, had taken the reins. Because as he sank into the weight of his own exposure, the final act of reckoning was already in motion, one that would leave him broken and the world watching. The city was quiet that morning. Not silent, just poised. Like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to witness the final act. I walked into the courtroom with a measured pace. Every step was deliberate. Every movement calculated. I wasn't nervous. I was inevitable. He sat at the defendant's table, eyes darting to the gallery, to the judge, and finally landing on me. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely small. The judge called the session to order. Her voice was even, neutral, but sharp as glass. Mrs. Hale, she said, glancing at the mountain of evidence I had meticulously prepared, please proceed. I didn't start with accusations. I didn't begin with outrage. I began with truth. I laid out the timeline not just of his financial misdeeds, but his calculated betrayal in every aspect of our lives. Every hidden email. Every transfer. Every manipulation. Then, the twist. I revealed a set of documents he had never considered. Evidence of his own attempts to manipulate the court system, to misrepresent assets, and even to undermine witnesses he assumed were loyal. He hadn't expected me to discover that part. He hadn't imagined someone could piece together the entire architecture of deception and confront him publicly with it. Because when the evidence hit the courtroom, the reaction was immediate: whispers, gasps, and stunned faces, and he realized the full extent of his exposure. Suddenly, the narrative had changed entirely. All the witnesses he had relied upon began to hesitate. Colleagues who once sided with him now looked at me, quietly, with respect. Even his attorney, usually so commanding, faltered under the weight of my presentation. I let the silence speak for me. I let the evidence do the work. I had already planned this so meticulously that even his defense couldn't find a foothold. The judge's eyes met mine briefly. No surprise. No judgment. Only acknowledgement. The tide had turned, irrevocably. Then I revealed the part he never anticipated, the emotional truth he had tried to bury. He had believed I was naive. He had believed I would crumble quietly, privately, as his schemes continued unchecked. But I had not only discovered the truth. I had positioned it in a way that exposed him fully, financially, publicly, and personally. I watched him slowly realize that the court, the city, the people around him, everyone had seen through the facade he thought was unbreakable. He opened his mouth. I waited. The silence stretched. He had nothing left to say. Because the final blow was not just exposure. It was the realization that every choice he had made had led him here powerless, unprotected, and publicly undone. As the court processed the evidence, I stepped back, folding my hands. The courtroom was tense, the kind of tension that grips bones and lingers in the air. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel glee. I felt quiet, controlled satisfaction. The power dynamic had shifted. He was exposed. I was in command. And in the quiet, calculated way that had defined my plan from the beginning, I finally reclaimed my agency. Even as the court acknowledged the financial and personal revelations, an unexpected ripple occurred. One of his allies, someone he had considered loyal, publicly questioned his integrity, directly referencing my evidence. The room went still. Every person in the gallery leaned in, sensing the magnitude of the shift. Every lie, every deception, every assumption he made was now crumbling around him. Because while the legal victory was imminent, the personal reckoning, the internal collapse he would face alone was just beginning. After hours of presentation, cross-referencing evidence, and clarifying his manipulations, the judge called for a recess. I stepped into the hallway. The chill of Chicago air brushed my cheeks. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. Every plan, every observation, every calculated move had led to this. Not chaos. Not dramatic confrontation. But quiet, inevitable justice. I felt the power of being in control. Not loud. Not vindictive. Just precise. Just mine. When court resumed, the judge outlined the consequences: financial restitution, full exposure of hidden assets, and a clear acknowledgement of deceit and manipulation. His face remained pale, defeated. No arguments. No rebuttals. No way to spin the story. And in that silence, I finally understood the full extent of my own victory. It wasn't just the court ruling. It was the shift of perception, the quiet collapse of his arrogance, the reclamation of my agency. Because as the final pieces fell into place, the world watched him crumble, and I stood quietly, fully in command of the narrative and my own life. The city was quieter than usual that morning. Not because the world had paused, but because my world had. I stepped onto the balcony of my apartment, letting the cold Chicago wind brush against my face. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. The storm had passed, leaving everything exposed, everything rearranged. The air smelled faintly of winter and steel, of the kind of reality that doesn't ask for permission to hit you. And I realized, I had survived it all. Not just survived. I had reclaimed it. Rebuilding isn't glamorous. It isn't about buying new furniture or relocating to a penthouse. It's about reclaiming the small things first. My mornings, uninterrupted, with a hot coffee and silence. My evenings, unshackled from manipulation or calculated glances. My thoughts, my plans, my space, my voice. The financial consequences had leveled the playing field. I wasn't wealthy yet, but I was independent. And independence feels heavier than any stack of bills, because it's earned, not inherited. Even weeks later, the ripples of the courtroom events continued. He had lost trust. He had lost leverage. He had lost control. Friends he assumed loyal now walked on eggshells around him. Colleagues who once followed blindly now questioned every word. The subtle power he wielded like a weapon was gone. And I realized something: it didn't matter if he tried to rebuild. He had underestimated the patience, intelligence, and precision of the one he thought was powerless. Because he still hadn't realized that I wasn't just winning the courtroom battle, I was rewriting the rules of my own life. I didn't act recklessly. I didn't flaunt victory. I moved deliberately, quietly, ensuring that my next steps solidified not only independence but power. Settling personal finances with meticulous precision. Reclaiming assets and accounts he had tried to manipulate. Ensuring my reputation was untarnished, respected, unassailable. Every small decision now carried weight. Every step forward was mine alone, guided by observation and patience, not fear or dependency. I allowed myself to feel, in private, the storm I had survived. Relief, yes. Sadness for wasted years, yes. Anger, still lingering, yes. But those emotions were no longer weapons used against me. They were tools, reminders of the precision I had honed, the patience I had maintained, the intelligence I had quietly leveraged. The emotional fallout was no longer a shackle. It was a foundation. Because while he struggled to find footing, I had already built a platform of strength he could never dismantle. Rebuilding power also meant redefining relationships. I distanced myself from anyone complicit in his schemes. I nurtured bonds with those who had remained observant, loyal, and discreet. I realized that subtle alliances were more powerful than dramatic gestures. And through these connections, I found new opportunities. Not flashy, not immediate, but steady, reliable, mine to command. Most of the world didn't know the full extent of what had transpired. They saw the courtroom verdict, they saw the headlines, they saw a woman standing tall, unbroken. But what they didn't see was the quiet, calculated journey that led to that moment. They didn't see the months of observation, the patience, the strategy, the subtle, invisible threads pulling the dominoes into place. I let them think it was simple. I let them think it was luck. Because true power doesn't need recognition. It needs execution. One evening, I returned home, and for the first time in years, I felt unencumbered. No lies whispered behind my back. No threats looming. No manipulations weighing on my decisions. I poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights reflect on the river below. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't celebrate. I simply existed. And that quiet existence, free and empowered, was my ultimate victory. Because in reclaiming my life, I discovered that true power isn't shown in noise or spectacle, it is held silently, confidently, and unapologetically. The city never pauses. Chicago moves on relentlessly, indifferent to individual triumphs or defeats. I sit in my apartment, looking out over the skyline, and I realize that the real story is never the exposure. It's the journey to awareness, the quiet accumulation of knowledge, patience, and precision. I think of him, the man who once laughed at me, who underestimated me, who believed silence equaled weakness. I feel nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, just clarity. True power isn't loud. It isn't theatrical. It doesn't demand attention. It waits. It observes. It calculates. And when the moment is right, it acts. I remember the nights of surveillance, the hours tracing finances, the careful planning that made every move deliberate. Each step felt painstaking at the time. Each moment of restraint felt like torture. But it was necessary. Because patience is the most underestimated weapon of all. And intelligence, wielded quietly, can dismantle even the most fortified lies. Because the lesson isn't in vengeance itself, it's in precision, observation, and the unwavering confidence to wait for the perfect moment. I have changed. I am no longer the woman who tolerated disrespect, deceit, or arrogance. I speak less, but my words carry weight. I observe more, but I act decisively. I have learned to trust my instincts and my judgment. The process of reclaiming my life has shaped me into someone I barely recognized at first: stronger, calmer, more formidable. And I, like her, people often underestimate silence. They assume quiet equals submission. But silence is deliberate. Silence is strategic. Silence allows one to see clearly, to act precisely, and to emerge unscathed from chaos. My victory wasn't explosive. It wasn't public spectacle. It was quiet. Measured. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. The world witnessed the results, yes, but they didn't understand the process, the patience, the careful orchestration, the unwavering focus. I reflect on the irony. He thought he controlled fate. He thought arrogance would shield him. He underestimated the one person whose silence was stronger than his loudest manipulations. Fate, it seems, has a sense of poetic justice. It rewards patience, precision, and quiet strength. And in the end, the world shifted without me raising a voice. Without drama. Without spectacle, because the strongest victories are often the ones that leave you unshaken. And leave the other side broken, wondering how it ever happened. Because the quiet moments, the calculated patience, the careful observation, they are what truly define power. I sip my wine, feeling the cool evening wind against my face. I am free. I am in control. I am finally the author of my own life. The moral is simple: never underestimate the quiet observer. Never underestimate patience. Never underestimate the calculated power of someone who has been wronged and refuses to be powerless. I have learned, survived, and rebuilt. I have acted with precision and walked away with dignity. And in this quiet, controlled victory, I find something more enduring than revenge: freedom, agency, empowerment.